I think God is saying or referring to those people who claim to be following the Deen, but it is a lie. They're actually not following the Deen.
Just come across to me as if like these next two verses are describing people who aren't fulfilling their social obligations here.
If you see the word prayer, slide over to the transliteration into the Arabic and see which version they're using. And then at that, because if you see dua, then you're likely talking about a prayer.
But what we have at least determined in today's podcast is that prayer is not the correct translation everywhere.
There's submission and there's peace. And I think Al-Islam is submission for God in order to attain peace. I think that's the only true peace that we can really have, is to be accountable to God alone and not have any other master.
Peace and blessings, everybody. Welcome to another podcast. This series of podcasts we're doing called Unpicking Verses. And many thanks to all of those who have been responding to previous episodes that we have posted on YouTube. Fantastic comments coming back. A lot of suggestions in terms of verses that people would like us to unpick, which we certainly intend to do so, God willing. And we're back to do another one for you. And firstly, let me quickly say salam and peace to my fellow unpickers here. Ahmed.
Salam, peace.
Peace to you. And Brother Mike.
Peace and blessings to you and
Peace and blessings. So today we are going to be unpicking a small chapter. So there are 7 verses we're going to try and get through today. And this is chapter 107, which has 7 verses. Here we go. Right. So this is Surah Al-Ma'oon, which is 107. And we're going to be unpicking the 7 verses which are contained within this chapter. So before we get into the actual unpicking itself, we have our resident reader, Mike. Perhaps you could just take us through a reading of this before we start to get into the meat of it.
Absolutely. We're going to start with chapter 107, verse 1, and I'm just going to read through each one. I'm not going to call out the verses to keep the flow simple and smooth. Have you seen the one who denies the judgment? Then that is the one who repulses the orphan and does not feel the urge to feed the poor. So woe to those who follow, those who about their following are neglectful, those who they make show, and they deny the small kindnesses.
Thank you, Mike. And there are a couple of interesting points in this one before we get started, which I noted as I was beginning to take a look at this one, is that as we get through this, I think it'll be interesting to look at some of the common translations that people have actually applied to the words in this chapter. So, for example, in the first verse itself, where, as you read the translation about the one who gives a lie to the or denies the judgment. It's interesting, and it'll be interesting to get your views on this as well. That the word or the words being used by God in the Qur'an here is yukathibu bid-deen. So the word is deen at the end, and it's been commonly translated as the one who denies the judgment. And as I've left it as deen on the screen here, as you can see, because I think the translation of that word in something perhaps as we go through this, we might come back to as to what deen actually means in the context of this particular chapter. And I suspect that we might come across those types of things to unpick in a couple of other verses in this chapter as well, including the very last word and last verse as well. So it will certainly be interesting to, as we go through this, to have a conversation about that.
Absolutely, 100%. I did change one word in there where often it's translated as prayer to something different like follow. And I want to address that as well as we're talking about the different translations, because as you said, and this is the thing that we've pointed out in our previous unpickings, is the English translations often don't do justice to the Arabic meaning, the actual meaning of the Arabic, right? And often when we see translations, as demonstrated, the English is often translated to biasly adhere to a specific secular ideology, such as Shia or Sunni, etc. And so it's really important to point these kind of discrepancies out and show people how important it is to do what we're doing, to take the time to question it, even though it seems and sounds sound. It may not be. So it's always important to take time to go through and question it, see what you can find out that the Arabic means, utilize the root word system, because that's going to give you a more rounded understanding of what the word should be, or the understanding should be.
I picked up on only a couple of things here, like similar to what you gentlemen said, and I was able to, I think, like you said, pick out on the same words. Exactly what you pulled out on was the beginning of Deen, with it being to do with the Deen here. And I came across an interesting verse that kind of related to me what the Deen, what it could mean here with Deen. And I turned to the second half of chapter 5, verse 3. So it's talking about prohibitions in the beginning of it, where it says, Hurimat alaykum.
There we go.
Where I'm talking from is from where it says, El-Yom, this day, I have completed for you your religion. Well, that's what it says in the translation.
Yeah.
So the word here becomes dinakum. Okay? So now I think this is where we get a bit more of a description as to what's going on.
Sure. I think we should start by finding out, what does Deen encompass? What is the Deen? They've translated it here, just like in other places, to religion, but I don't think that defines it properly in any way. We know already that it's not supposed to be a religion, so that can't apply that way. We've got to find a better understanding of it. I think once we discover the understanding of what the concept of Deen is, and then apply it to the verse, it's going to make a more substantial understanding, probably be much more openly conclusive of all mankind versus a specific type of religion. Would you like me to go to the root word and see what the root word says?
If you could.
So Deen follows under the root word of dal, ya, nun. And the description for it is obedience, submissiveness, servility. It says here religion, high, elevated, noble, glorious rank, condition, state, took, received alone, or borrowed upon credit, become indebted, in debt, under an obligation of a debt, contract a debt, repay, reimburse a loan, rule, govern, manage it, possess or own it, become habituated or accustomed to something. Confirmation. And it says death because it is a debt everyone must pay, as in parentheses. A particular law or statute or system, a custom, habit, business, a way, course, manner of conducting, acting, repayment, compensation. Then it breaks down the different versions of it. Daynun refers to debt or lending. Tadayantum is for you transact. La diinun na. They do not subscribe, do not observe, and then deen, requital, judgment, faith, law, obedience, and medinun, and medinin, requited. I find it very interesting that when they finally break down the word deen, and you look in everywhere it's used, it's only 3 places that use the specific spelling that verse 107 uses.
Deen. Yeah. I think just expanding on that. So this verse, which Ahmed, you just noted, chapter 5, verse 3, I think if we had continued a little bit further, it allows us to understand what the Deen is.
Mm-hmm.
It's because it says, Waraditu lakumul Islam dinan. So it's saying that I've completed upon you my favor, and I've approved for you Islam, which means submissions to God's laws as your deen. Right? So just taking it from the beginning, this day I've perfected for you your deen, and I've completed upon you my favor, ni'mati, my favor. And I've approved for you Islam as your deen. And Islam, as we know, is submission.
Right.
So our deen is our submission, which is, if we take the root word definitions, which Mike, you were listing out for us, it's about the I can't remember the words you used, but it's about, you know, following the laws, or it's there were synonyms of submission.
Right. Requital, judgment, faith, law, obedience.
Yes, obedience. So the deen is the submission to God's ordinances, laws, and guidance. That is deen. And if we take that as the definition of deen, if we apply that to then coming back to Surah Al-Ma'un, chapter 107, it then goes on to, is basically saying in the first verse, have you seen the one who gives a lie to this one, to this deen? So the way I've read that or understood it is God is saying to us, observe those people. So when he's saying, have you seen, he's actually, I think, encouraging us to observe those people who give a lie to the deen. So I think God is saying, or referring to those people who claim to be following the deen, but it is a lie. They're actually not following the deen. They claim to be, but they're not actually. Whether it's a conscious lie, it's something that, you know, we need to try and understand, but they're living a lie, essentially, I think, is what the first verse is telling us.
And then it goes on to define how you can identify that type of person, right?
Yes, exactly. It's going to give us more information so that we can unpick what this yukadhibu bid-din means.
Yeah, because then it goes on to say, then that is the one who repulses the orphan and does not feel the urge to feed the poor.
Okay.
Identifiers.
Yeah. Because I think it goes to something else after that. But if we take up on those two descriptions, we can pull away the two words for the orphan is yateem and miskeen. I think the scope of what's being spoke about here is a bit broader than just talking about orphans and poor. You know, when we go back to the root words, and we said before that we get more meaning when we look at the different definitions that can be used here.
Sure. So for orphans, yateem, it starts out orphan, and then it says fatherless, become isolated or lonely, solitary, wary, jaded, become widowed, become without father before puberty or maturity. The sad thing is, everywhere it's used in all of its synonyms, within or after the root word, where every word associated with that root word is all translated to orphans, and everywhere it's used.
Yeah, because I think the orphans is more of a likeliness in physical terms. Whereas I think, you know, even people without role models in their life and people, you know, who are a bit like, I think they can be deemed as castaways or people on the fringes of society. I think this could also include or encompass that type of people.
As a more inclusive verse, so that it applies to anywhere, wherever mankind might be. It doesn't have to be just orphans per se as an orphan child, but anybody who's been under that or the synonyms that go with it.
Yeah,
when you recognize somebody who's lonely, sad, distressed, etc., somebody who's not a part or actively a part of your society in a normal circumstances and normal situations could be looked at as that type of person, like you said, on the fringes of society. who they're down on their luck in one way or another.
And also, miskeen could also encompass people who don't have anything to give them. Not necessarily something that someone who you have to give them something. I think it could also encompass somebody who doesn't necessarily have something to offer for you.
Yeah, I mean, I've previously, when I've thought about miskeen, I've thought about somebody who is stuck, someone who needs a leg up. So it could be someone who's lost a job. It could be someone whose business has collapsed, someone who is not able to earn a livelihood. So it's anyone who requires some help to get back up again.
They're unable to operate within their own means.
Correct.
Need some external help. That's that sign or that challenge from God to us. Are we going to react as we should? Are we going to be like these people and ignore them?
Yeah, I think that's similar to what I was getting to. Is like they might need something from us, but they haven't got anything to offer us in return. So,
but should we be seeking that, right? If we're doing it for God and not for self, it shouldn't matter if there's a return. If we recognize them as such, in as this verse describes them, and we're not at least giving an effort to do something about it, if we have the means, remember, if we have the means to, as individuals as well, right? Because we're told in the Quran, don't give away everything, but don't be so stingy, right? You don't want to give away everything and put yourself in the same situation they're in, but don't be so stingy that you're never helping them either. You got to find the middle path that also fulfills or falls within your own means. So maybe you don't have money for somebody who needs help, but maybe that person doesn't have clothing or suitable clothing for the weather, and you've got extra jackets and things of that nature. Those are different ways to do it. It doesn't always have to be a monetary thing. It can be your time. It could just be simply listening to this person's issues and maybe having an idea where they could get some help and giving them advice that might help get them on the right track. It doesn't always have to be this black and white ideology that many people fall under, unfortunately.
I think that's right. So if we take yateem and miskeen, collectively, it's capturing those people who are in some form of need.
Yeah.
And it could be anything. It could be clothing, like you say. It could be advice. It could be education. It could be directions. It could of course be financial support as well. It could be love. It could be mental support. So yeah, I think it captures the needy, and I think Allah's using these words, yateem and miskeen, to try and get us to understand that it's all types of those people. And in fact, by translating it purely as orphans and the poor, actually what we're doing is we're doing it, as you said, injustice, because we're limiting it then. But actually, God is using these two words to say, no, look broad.
Broad.
Yeah. And we've unfortunately, with our translations, and it's very difficult to translate it into English. I fully understand that. But the words we use sometimes have those inaccurate effects of keeping it too limited when it should be broad, or vice versa.
Right. And unfortunately, in most of the translations you see in today's society, they are literally biased to one sect or another because they've had to go through and be approved to be put out there the way they are. And the people who do that approval won't allow things to be corrected as it should be. It's why, again, I can't express enough how important it is to do things like what we're doing, so that you can find your truths within there, especially for those who are not Arabic, not Arabic, fluent in Arabic or Arabic speaking at all. They solely rely on an English translation, have no concept or idea that what they're reading may not be accurate.
Absolutely agree.
But I don't mean to go out and bash anybody, but it's an important thing to point out.
Yeah. Oh, it is, because I think it sets up the way we study the Quran. So I think it's really important to point out. Thank you for doing that.
That's why I think that why we brought up this idea of the Qur'an involving study was so I think it fell in line with what basically is involved in this idea of studying the book, is having to go through processes of learning and understanding in different levels where you're unlocking different keys to gain broader understandings, and back to the idea of the puzzle narrative that, shared with us a great way of expressing it as well, and the idea of unlocking different bits of your puzzle in life and it contributing to this adventure. It is very interesting to see how these words can bring depth and meaning by studying, like pulling out one word there in these verses. It just introduced different layers of depth in the verses. It shows the richness of the text.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, just changing the first word in the first verse. Have you seen the one who denies? And they put here judgment, right? What is on yours was
Yeah, so I've just left it as Deen, just because the translations I saw
right. But
didn't quite say right.
but
Yeah.
who's the only person that can give judgment?
It's God.
So then how is it that we're seeing somebody who denies judgment if they haven't been judged yet? So that word just cannot even be used. It's not applicable this way, right?
Yeah.
Yet applied that way, it changes the whole context and meaning of this verse. Just that one word alone. And when you change it to Deen, and now we've kind of gone over Deen as more or less the scope of the guidelines and how we live within the guidelines of the book, the guidance of the book that we get from it, and apply it and stay within those boundaries of it, right? On our path, we don't try to go outside the boundaries of the path that we're on as we learn and grow. Have you seen the one who denies the guidance or the laws, the way of life that Allah has given us? Then that is the one who repulses the orphan, right?
Right.
Repulses the one who is in need, and the one who and not feels the urge to feed those who have less. It changes the narrative from a specific religious connotation to an all mankind, all involved mankind, because it doesn't matter who this person is. It doesn't have to be a Muslim. It could be anybody, right? Any person who doesn't live a life with a moral compass and stays within the boundaries of that moral compass will show the simple signs. Will visually be able to see that person, how they react in their day-to-day life around other people. It doesn't mean that they're Muslim. It doesn't mean they're Christian. It doesn't mean they're Jewish, Hindu, whatever it may be. It doesn't say any of that here. But unfortunately, that's the way it's led to be believed, that it's speaking only about Muslims within the Muslim faith. We're led to believe that it's pointing out the people who are not, is what I meant to say.
If I may put it in a slightly different way, but trying to make the same point, is that the one who follows the Deen, if we take the opposite of this,
yeah,
is not bound by the religious name that they claim that they are part of.
Right.
No. And I think if we go back, sorry, I just noticed something else here as well, where it's talking about el-Deen, not just any Deen, because also the word Deen is like a debt or an obligation. So if we go back to the verse I pulled up before, and it talks about how God has fulfilled his bounty for mankind, or that's just a paraphrase, and then it says, and I have made your Deen Al-Islam. Okay, so that's like to say that that's our obligation to Allah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what it's saying here is if el-Deen is our obligation to Allah, which is described in 5:3 as Al-Islam, if we go to the next verse, it's then describing people, the next two verses, in my opinion, when I look at these two verses 2 and 3, it's like describing someone who doesn't fulfill their social obligations.
Community obligations.
Within their local community. I think, a community that is thriving, you see people helping each other, and if someone's in need, even if they don't have something to offer back for the community, it's in the community's interest to help them because they're a part of it anyway. And also the people on the fringes should be, rather than pushed out further onto the fringes, they should bring them closer and try to include them within the community.
Yes.
So from looking at, after what we've just been discussing, it just come across to me as if these next two verses are describing people who aren't fulfilling their social obligations here.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I wonder whether also this is giving us an indication of the key principles of the Deen, which is the social aspect of it, which is the community aspect of it. Because when God talks about having completed his bounties in chapter 5, verse 3, so his bounties, so he has blessed us with bounties, right? And that's many, many things apart from wealth. It's food, it's your knowledge, it's your physical bounties, it's your health, it's your wisdom, it's many, many things that we have been blessed with. And there's a community aspect of this, which is, if I've given you the bounties, God is saying, you now have a social responsibility with those bounties that I've given you, and that is Deen. So it's no surprise and it's no accident that God has first said, I've completed my bounties upon you now. Right? His bounty is not just the virtue of saying, oh, you have a Deen. His bounties are multifold.
Right.
And what he's saying, I've given you now lots of things, and now you have a Deen. And here God is describing, at least we would have to accept part of what that Deen is. At least part of it, which is the social aspect of it.
Yeah, to expand on that, I mean, we have our personal self that we need to first come to terms with, but we can't just take care of ourselves and expect that's the end of it, because all throughout the book, it's establish salah and give zakah, which means it's not just about what I've do for myself, but I also must be giving as well to those around me, because he doesn't want to build societies of individuals who only think for themselves. He wants you to be a society that's always open and inviting and helping those who are less fortunate. In doesn't matter what, monetary, education, health, fitness, any of those things. The list goes on. It's anything that's external to you that can help benefit the next, somebody around you. It's well established through the book that our outwardly, the way we outwardly present ourselves and how we interact and take care of others, and clearly as these verses make it as well, it's pointing out, have you seen? Are you using your eyes? This is the difference between somebody who's, on a path to righteousness versus the opposite direction. So, we're being challenged to go out and notice the difference.
Yes, and I think we're going to come on to, of course, the other verses. I think right to the end of this particular chapter, we'll see this common thread, which is around this community, the responsibilities around our community, through the sharing of our bounties, right? Which is part of this Deen, the sharing of our bounties and helping the needy.
Right.
Searching out those who are in need and supporting them, helping them. And I think we will see that, as we get to the conclusive part of this, the chapter, that actually that is the thread, I believe, which is flowing through this particular chapter.
Yeah. Do we want to try and move on to the next verse?
Yes, the next verse. And before we move on to this, if I may just say that if we if we can see when we are looking at this chapter that the thread here is around the community and social responsibility of man who claims to be following this deen, not giving a lie to it, then I think let's keep that in mind as we now go into the next couple of verses.
Okay, so the next verse, so woe to those who pray, is the most common translation. Now, we need to go to the translation for lil musallina and go to the root word. Now, what's so very special about this particular word, this word in particular, musallina, and al-musallina, is that there is a, in all the root word defining groups that I've checked on, there's actually a description for this particular word and what it should mean. And in this case, it says, as the example, in a horse race, when the second horse follows the first one so closely that its head always overlaps the first horse's body, that horse is called al-musalli. So here you have a very specific spelling and version of this word that relates to the root word sadlawa. And then it says, i.e., the one who follows closely or remains attached, in brackets as well. So I don't understand if there's an exact definition for this particular word, why and how it's always translated to prayer. It really threw me off, because as you read the verses and you see anywhere that pray or prayer is used, there's many words under the root word sadlamwa that are used, but this one is the only one that has specific translation as to what this word means. So at that point, I know it cannot be to those who pray. So now we have to apply it with the exact translation that it gives for it. And so woe to those who follow closely or remain attached or are attached close to. That means something different than woe to those who pray, right? Because why would you say woe to those who pray? Anybody who's praying is obviously, or I shouldn't say obviously, but the concept of praying is one who wants to communicate with God in whatever form or way, through physical, ritualistic prayer, just in their mind, out in the open, however it may be. But when you have a specific definition, you have to apply it. You can't just say it's pray. Although many will say, well, but praying's connecting, right? It's connecting, but it doesn't define being connected so close that you're following so close that you never separate, right? That's not what the word pray defines. It has to be within the definition that's given to it. And that changes it and applies more to the concept of the first three verses now that we've read when we're looking at it that way, as we continue to read the verses after that. So woe to those who follow closely, those who about their, and now look, what's the word used in 107.5? Is it also the same word, musalli? It's not. It's salaatihim. Did I say that right? Salaatihim?
Yes.
Right. Now, you guys break this one down in Arabic, because this has a different meaning to it as well.
Yeah, so the first thing I would say, and supportive of your description there, it does not appear to make any sense to translate musalleen as prayer, not least because of the actual definition that you provided there, as you say, but also, as you alluded to, it wouldn't make any sense in the context of this chapter. So right from the beginning, we're talking about people who give a lie to the deen. They claim to be following a deen, right? But it's a lie. It talks about people who are not fulfilling their obligations in their community. Then talking about prayer doesn't fit.
Right.
That puzzle, just keeping to the analogy of the puzzle, that's an odd piece in a puzzle.
Right.
If it was prayer, it wouldn't fit anywhere.
Piece another puzzle into that one where it doesn't fit anywhere.
Yeah.
Can I just share a verse to help us add a bit more understanding to what we're trying to derive from here? There is a verse in chapter 75, two verses, 31 and 32 in 75.
Would you like me to read them?
Please, yes.
Do I need to ask anymore? All right.
You're our resident reader.
And not he accepted the truth, and not he, it says here, prayed, but he denied and turned away.
Okay.
Well, those don't even match.
Okay, so if we take it from here to say that denied and salah are two actions that this person didn't do. Yeah, and then it says instead of doing those, they're doing something else. So kadhaba, which is the same as in the other in the chapter that we're looking at, instead of saddaqa, he did kadhaba, and instead of salla, he did tawalla.
Right. So you got antonyms.
Right. Okay. So we've got turned away. So when you're saying like following closely, me personally, I would also say like turning towards. I've used a narrative of, I think pilots for ships and aeroplanes, they have a navigation system that instead of it pointing them directly towards the location, it keeps correcting on the way.
Mm.
So they always have to turn towards on the journey. So when we're trying to make the journey as straight as possible, when we're navigating through this ocean, for example, as we've used that metaphor before, as we're navigating, we should always try to turn towards and find, what it is that we're headed for.
Okay. And we could also apply the concept, if we know that musallee is following closely, then the concept of following should be also synoptic in all the rest of the descriptions for Sad Lamwa. That concept, should be synoptic. So you could also say, and not he accepted the truth, and not he followed, but he denied and turned away. Now you've got the antonyms that match, right? The opposites of each other that correspond correctly.
And like you said, and like we were saying, you said the word followed there. So if you're following someone and they change direction, you're going to have to change your direction in order to turn towards them.
To stay on course with them.
Stay on course with them, yeah. So even in life as well, sometimes we have to change course in life because the situation's changed or we've reached a milestone. And I think this, if we go back to this obligations of the community, it fits in a bit better here because it's talking about people. Woe to the people in the community who are staying on this course, who are all keeping on this course to make. Because also, if we look at the Deen Al-Islam, I think to say submission to God in order to attain peace. For me, that's how I define Islam, because there's submission and there's peace, and I think Al-Islam is submission for God in order to attain peace. I think that's the only true peace that we can really have, is to be accountable to God alone and not have any other master in God's place.
Yeah, that I think makes sense because firstly, this the antonym that you've highlighted here in chapter 75 makes that pretty clear. So God is defining these words here for us, and it's very much linked, isn't it? So you're turning towards, right, and which allows you to follow, which allows you to continue to follow closely, right? Because if you're turning away, you're not going to be following at all. or if you're directed slightly off, you're still not going to be very close. And so I think all of these things, these different descriptions of what the meaning of the words here, I think they all make sense. What does not make sense is prayer,
Right.
right? Because in the other descriptions that we've just discussed make more sense. There is a physical effort involved in the community. And I think that's a big difference. The prayer is very personal.
Right.
Right. And the prayer in the Qur'an is more closely associated with the word dua.
It's way more associated. I would
Yes.
say 100% towards dua. And
Dua.
that's an important thing to remember when you're reading these English translations now. If you come to discover the difference between these two, and we should certainly cover this in a future podcast. But it's very important to the reader, the English speaking and English reading people who don't have familiarity with this. If you see the word prayer, slide over to the transliteration into the Arabic and see which version they're using. And then because if you see dua, then you're likely talking about a prayer. But if you see salat or salaatihim or anything related to the sadlamwa root word, at that point you have to question it and do some research and make sure you've got a firm understanding and that it's just not a biased translation. As we're finding here, it truly is very important because it is completely changing the dynamics in the context of this chapter all on its own. I mean, one word changes it. And then as you go and find more than one word, then you get a whole bunch of change. It's a beautiful thing.
And also the guidance becomes much clearer. If we now take this thread as far as we've just unpicked this, it's becoming that picture is becoming, I mean, the puzzles are coming together and that picture is forming as to what God is telling us, and that's therefore the guidance. And we've spoken previously about how God gives us guidance through the Quran, through our deep study of it, etc., which is what we're attempting to do today, for example. And you can see that guidance is forming, what God is saying, what we should not do and what we should be doing, what's important, what is Deen,
what is
Deen. Yeah, it's becoming clearer as we go through this.
As we go through it becomes much more clear, much more defined and refined, and much more inclusive.
Yes,
exactly. I think if we were to take salat as prayer here, it would separate those two verses from the context previous to it, because it's talking about these social obligations, and all of a sudden it's taking something into some sort of worship practice. Whereas this is more to do with a community keeping together and not allowing people to go astray from this adherence and this direction that the community is going. So they're keeping people coming along with the community.
So shall we try reading through it with the understanding so far up to this point?
Yes, please.
Okay, try it again. Have you seen the one who denies the deen? Then that is the one who repulses the...
Shall we say the one that's lonely, the one
that's lonely,
and
the one in need, and those not feel the urge to feed those in need. So woe to those who follow closely, those who about their connection or their following are neglectful.
Yes.
We go to verse 107:6. Those who make show. I think this is an important point that it's making as well, right? There's a very poignant reason it's saying those who make show. What's your thoughts on this?
Just one more comment on the word salat in the fifth verse here, salaatihim. Could it mean, when it's put in this form, salaatihim, those who are neglectful about their duty to turn towards God when it comes to their social commitments?
Exactly, yes. People who don't stay in line with their duties
Makes a much better
cause
sense.
mischief It's probably, I'm adding something in here, but it's probably some sort of causing some problems within everyone staying together.
So again, it's based around the same concept, but and it'll be interesting to test the formation of the word salaatihim as it comes with other verses. But certainly in this context, it seems to suggest that it's about that duty to perform the social aspects of your deen.
It seems like as we go through this verse, that it's the end of one of these verses that's been changed, and now that we're deciphering this, it's becoming so clear and so different.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. I was gonna respond to what you suggested before, Mike, about verse 6, where it says, "Those who only show off."
Right, or make a show of it, right?
Make a show. Right, okay. So I think this is referring to the description back to verse 1, where it says, "Those who lie about the deen." They're going to lie about the deen, so they're doing it just to show off.
What could be an example of that? I mean, within our own,
I think, for example, like in the society, I think even walking out in the street, everyone has a role to play in this society. It's not just one person holding it together or a few people. It's affected by everyone and everyone's behavior. So if someone goes out there and causes disruption within the community, and you see it a lot these days, is they're doing it and they're showing off. So they're, for example, there's different forms of protests going on even these days, and there's conflicts between these protests to say that some of them are illegitimate protests with no real cause, and there's other protests that are going on that have got a huge cause, that even they're getting pushed back. So I think...
are you guys familiar with Speaker's Corner?
Yes.
I would think
Absolutely.
that would be an excellent example as well.
Yeah, so there are many examples even there as well, I think, of both things. There's people there who are to spread knowledge and stuff, and it's really good. And there are other people who are trying to steal from the noise there and just showing off. So yeah, that's a brilliant example.
It always seems like the two different kind of people are easy to identify too, right? Those who are there peacefully with the intent of just sharing knowledge and helping educate always seem to be the peaceful ones. And the ones who are not, that are there they say they're showing off as if they're pious and doing the right thing. But their demeanor, the way they present themselves, how they treat and act at other people, the way they communicate with other people, it like follows in line with this whole chapter. The way in the community, how they behave, seems to point them out. First time I watched that, it was very disturbing, to say the least.
Absolutely. I don't know, Ahmed, do you want to add anything to that? We could move on to the 7th verse.
Yeah, I think we can go on to the 7th verse here. You mentioned it earlier on about this final word in the whole chapter. And personally, I found there's one instance of this word being used in the Qur'an, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if you looked into it. Yes, it's only this one instance. So when I was reading it, I just went in my mind to the meaning of the word, what it's commonly used for. And then I looked into the translation and I realized that the translation is offering something very different.
It does. You want me to read the root definition for it?
Please, yes.
Yeah, and just if I may, just sorry to interrupt, before we do that, the root word or the root letters for yamna'oon is slightly different to the root word for al-ma'oon. They're related, but they're slightly different.
Always, let's go in order. If that root and the meaning and because it says, and they deny. So if that's not a correct translation, then please say something now, because that's going to obviously change what the next word means too.
Yeah, so when I looked into the root for yamna'oon, the first word, which is mim nun ain, the deny, I think, is fine. I think in the context, for me, withhold appeared to be a better definition, withhold, rather than deny.
I agree, yes.
Yeah.
Or they suppress.
I can read the root word for that as well. Mim nun ein.
Yes.
To prevent or hinder or hold back, to impede, withhold, arrest, restrain, to keep, debar, preclude, inhibit, to forbid, prohibit, interdict, deny or refuse, also to protect or defend or guard a thing, dispute or contest, resist or withstand, to strengthen or fortify, to make a thing inaccessible or unapproachable or difficult of access. So yeah, I could see how there is a bit of a difference there. I mean, deny it synoptically applies, but I believe that withhold is probably a more applicable translation in that.
It's a bit like when you have you hear these stories sometimes about these different villages that live in a valley, and those that are living slightly higher up, they promote the development of a dam so they can actually take advantage of the water, and they deny those villages which are further down. Yeah, so they are denying them, but they're denying them the water by virtue of withholding it for themselves.
Right.
So deny, yes, it works, but I think it's the withholding of it, of something by which they deny. I think is
right. He's withholding himself from in this particular case, the individual's withholding
something.
Something. I get absolutely.
Yeah. And then we can go on to what they're withholding, which is ma'oon.
Yeah.
Which is the next word.
Al-ma'oon. And it's mim, ein, nun. Went far or to a great or extraordinary length therein, went deeper beyond the bounds in a thing, affair. The drawing of water, charity, small kindness, neighborly deeds, and succor. So there it is in a nutshell. We're going back to the beginning, right? As to what type of person it's talking about and what type of thing this person's denying or withholding.
Yes, indeed. I think for me, it goes right back to the beginning, which is what we spoke about, which is Deen. And we spoke about when we were looking up the definition of Deen and how it connected to the social aspect of it, the responsibilities from a social perspective. We spoke about the responsibility we have of using the bounties or sharing the bounties which God has bestowed upon us for the benefit of the needy in our societies. So the way, when I was reading this last verse, what came to my mind as a picture, taking all of the verses before this, is that this is talking about how these individuals who are lying about following the Deen, what they're actually doing, they show off, they're making a show that they're following the Deen, but what they really do is they hold on to the bounties which God has bestowed upon them. They do not seek out the individuals in the communities that are in need and then use those bounties. They withhold it, like this example I just gave about these people living in a valley and they withhold the water.
Right.
These are people who are showing off, but actually they're withholding the bounties of God and not sharing them in their communities.
Yes. Well,
or maybe not even being a part of the community, withholding themselves from the community as a whole. I mean, it's that much inclusive, from the individual to the outwardly, as an individual and openly. So within and without.
Can I offer something else here?
Of course.
It's very similar to what both of you gentlemen are saying. I just wanted to go back to the first word in the last verse, which is mana, which you said is withhold, which is very correct. But I also saw in there that impede was in there, which is like for example, within this, we're going through the verses and realizing that this person is not living up to their responsibilities in these communities or societies, and they're impeding, because of them doing that, and they're doing things for show off within the community, it's impeding everyone. Yeah, I'm not sure whether or not it's, for their own intentions, or, I think there's both in society. There's people who impede societies at their own detriment also, and there's ones that do it for their own betterment. But I don't think this is specifically saying whether or not they're better off. It's just saying that the society itself is worse off because they're impeding it. Yeah? And the last word was a bit different. This is where I think my understanding was affected by me having a bit of a background in Arabic. And ma'na and ma'oon, how I would see it here is because the root ma'na comes from purpose and meaning, or having purpose and meaning. And we went into the root definition here, and it says went far or to a great extraordinary length, and then went deep or beyond bounds in the thing or an affair. So to me, that fits more of my understanding of what the root word means. And when it comes to charity, neighbourly deeds, and kindnesses, I think these are meaningful things. These things serve a purpose in community. Yeah? So if we look at it more as in they inhibit or they impede the purpose for what this community is serving, and they're not following in that direction, they're heedless in their adherence to this community's goals, and they're causing an impediment to the cause, like we say, the greater cause for the community.
Really interesting. And would that feed into the earlier verses? So I'm just thinking the connection between that and verses 2 and 3, for example.
Let me just bring this back up so I'm with you on the same page.
Or is it just an additional description of, so is verse number 7
Right.
an additional description of such person?
Yeah, well, I think in order for a community to work properly, and because we went back to this, we'll go back to even the beginning and say the Deen, if we're going to say the Deen is Al-Islam, then there is, a part of Al-Islam is to be living in peace. In my opinion, is we want peace in our life. We want peace with the Creator and in our life, so that we can do good and be pleased with our actions and the outcomes of what decisions we've made, despite whatever hardships we might come across. We want to eventually attain peace with it all. Yeah. So if we're going to work with a community, this is what the goal is within the community. We want everyone to be at peace. We want not just for us to be safe, we want for everyone in the community to be safe.
Right. And I mean, that's what we should be seeking as a behavior, within, falls in the concept of a moral compass.
Yeah. So I think here it's talking about people who are disrupting this peace, and they're doing things to show off, and they're causing things to come off purpose, off the reason. So they're causing like an impediment, or they're holding the community back from its purpose.
Right. So if I think about that another way, there's a purpose to the Deen. And what these people are doing is impeding the accomplishment of that purpose of Deen by virtue of them showing off, by not contributing and fulfilling the duties that they have to the societies.
Yeah, so they're repelling people off from the fringes. They're causing people to, they're repelling the...
Instead of creating inclusiveness, dividing instead of bringing together.
Well,
Right.
what better way to cause division by not helping people who need help?
And denying those who do. Just walk around day to day in your neighborhoods that are not as in good standing, so to speak, as maybe other people's neighborhoods, where there's a lot of crime and a lot of graffiti and a lot of destitute. You can walk around those neighborhoods and then watch how everybody treats each other. In those neighborhoods, nobody helps each other. There might be one or two people, but they're coming often from a different neighborhood to that neighborhood, those who are trying to be charitable. But do they make a show of it, or do they do it and walk away and not expect anything from it? Even somebody who's trying to be charitable, if they're doing it for the sole purpose of recognition, then they're still not following the because they're doing it for self.
Yeah, but it's also for this responsibility on the community, for the purpose of the community.
It's supposed to be a community as a whole, not just a select.
Not just for yourself. You don't
Right.
just want something in return off
Right.
that person for helping them.
That's why it gives me a bigger concept that this is not just about the concept of exposing a type of person, but this is a sign and a warning and confirmation for those who are on the path, the right path. They'll recognize, I need to remember that I too fall in this category if I'm not living and following through. I might be this great guy who has a good understanding of the book and live my personal life in a right way, but if I'm not attempting to go out in the community and then spread and help and give and those who need it, the lonely and the insecure and the destitute, the people who need help, if I'm not doing my part within my community and attempting to grow a good community of people who all follow that ideology, then I can be just as guilty of this as anybody else.
One thing which comes to mind also, taking it back to the beginning, that this surely illustrates that with Deen Al-Islam, a large part of it is this community aspect of it. Exactly, Mike, as you just described, the practical aspects of it. And that's a part of our deen. So when people describe what Deen Islam is, or if we get asked by our colleagues, fellow people on the street, our neighbors, oh, what is Islam to you? We have to describe this humanitarian aspect of it. We have to describe the community aspect of it. And we have to live by those that, exactly as you said, Mike, we might fall into the category of saying that we follow it, but actually we give a lie to it if we do not do it ourselves.
That's right.
Have to do this. And we have to demonstrate to people that this is Islam and this is the purpose of it and what the objective and the end outcome of it's going to be. And I say that because today, and I might even you might have known that I do some surveys on my TikTok channel now and again on various topics. I might actually do a survey around this, which is, what do you actually understand Islam to be about? And it would be very interesting to see if people understand Islam to be about this.
Right. I've come to understand that. Here's I don't want this to be derogatory, but I think it's important. Every time you say Islam, you are saying it as if it's a noun name of something, but it's actually an Arabic word. And what does that Arabic word mean?
It's funny you brought this word up again from the beginning, because it's actually the word deen. And when we went to 5.3, was it? We realized that the deen that we have been given from God is Al-Islam. Okay, but this is describing our obligations here as far as in a community practice to attain Islam. Okay, so the reason why I brought this up is because to me there's a goal from Islam, which is peace, to have a peaceful life.
Right.
Okay.
So
if we look to another verse that I was looking into. It's chapter 2. I read from 127 to 132, but I think the concept is from 130 to 132 in chapter 2. If you could read that for us, Mike, please.
Sure.
Maybe we could understand it.
And who will turn away from the deen of Abraham, except who fooled himself? And indeed we chose him in the world, and indeed he is the hereafter surely among the righteous. When said to him his Lord, Submit, he said, I have submitted to the Lord of the worlds. And enjoined Abraham upon his sons and Yaqub, O my sons, indeed Allah has chosen for you the deen. So not you die except while you are submissive.
Okay, right. So the reason why I use the word peace in conjunction with submission here is because I don't feel submission alone does it justice to say that, oh, I submit to God. And it's usually submission, it's related to like war, and you submit, or you submit to a master so that you give your will or your service. But I think the intention should be for peace, so that we understand that God has created us with bounties and abundance, and there's so much, so that I am peaceful with my life. And I understand there's going to be times where I'm maybe struggling more than other times, and then being tested through life. But my intention is to be at peace with God despite all that. So for me, it's surrender to a life of peace, or submission to a life of peace, where I'm going to do whatever I can do in order to attain a peaceful life, whether it be between my relationship with me and God, or whether it be between a relationship between me and my fellow humans that are around me. Whatever I can do, the best way to attain peace is I'm going to go about that through using the studies and the philosophies that is within the Qur'an. So we're looking at things like justice and fairness and all these different concepts. But I think simply is Islam is to seek a life of peace.
And that's why I asked that. Yeah, that's why I asked about Islam in the English translation, because I think it's imperative. Because the deen is the encompassment. It's a complete encompassment of what it takes to reach that. If we live by it within the parameters that's given to us, we will accomplish the end goal.
Yeah, if we take on our obligations for deen to be our obligations, to submit to a life of peace.
If we were to ask the majority of Muslims what Islam means to them,
right,
what do you think people will say?
Oh, it's the religion. They're going to call it a noun name. That's the name of my religion.
Yes.
Yeah, I think a lot of the times people quote 5 pillars.
That's right, the 5 pillars.
Yeah. And then ask them to show you where those are at in the book.
Yeah, and those 5 pillars, the majority of them are not related to our duty to our community.
No.
I was just going to say, and even the one that is zakah, it's given a formula which actually cannot help to achieve this outcome, which we've been discussing.
That's
so
right.
It's given a very rigid religious formula. So in fact, in reality, none of the 5 pillars that people claim are the foundation on which Islam is built, this duty of submission to peace, none of them actually have any impact on the community, which is, as we've just studied today, such an important, integral part of Deen.
Yes, and I think a lot of these 5 pillars are practiced within certain communities that can be, for example, in the UK, there are, within the United Kingdom, there are places where there are condensed Muslims in those areas, and they seem to be a bit segregated from the wider communities. I don't think that ties into what's being said here. I think this is to do with making communities of all people. And when we look at these attributes of people who are, for example, they don't encourage helping the needy, and they repulse the people who are in their own sort of loneliness, or they're on the fringes of society. I think these people are intertwined within all different backgrounds and parts of communities within all communities. And I think some communities deal with it better than others. Whereas you find some communities, these people are the ones that are on the forefront. These ones that are neglecting their duties. But I find that even within those communities, there are people who are, because there is a community, that there must be people who are holding it together, who are fulfilling their tasks or their roles.
I mean, I always find that regardless of what ideology people end up tending to follow, there are people who want to do good.
Sure, absolutely.
There are people that want to do good, and then there are people who give a lie to it and show that they're doing good, but they're not. And I think that's what God is trying to say in this chapter, is that look, there are those different people, and here are some ways that you can recognize those individuals that are giving a lie to the truth, to the Deen.
Yeah, right. How can you recognize them? And then also, again, it goes back to self. How do I make sure I'm not falling into this habit or this problem or this issue, this behavior, I should say?
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's giving us pointers here as to, our responsibility to the obligations of this community. Because even, myself, something that I'm often grateful for is that, not to say that where my parents came from was a bad place, but I feel blessed to be living in 2022 in the UK, the technology that's around me and the way people are, and it's peaceful. There's other places and other times that I could have been alive where life would have been a lot more difficult. And I think that a lot of people suffered and struggled and worked very hard in order to build these communities like this. And sometimes it can be a bit heartbreaking to see things fall apart within communities and see things, places not become as affluent as they used to be. And I think this is due to people not upholding their responsibilities. So this is telling us, how we play a part. If there's people on the fringes, we can't just say, oh yeah, they're on the fringes. And people who need help within our community is our responsibility. Again, we should be involved in this, take it personally, and not.
Yeah. Yeah, and one very interesting thing which comes into my mind is, so we're talking about communities, and when you talk about communities, we tend to think about the physical community which is around us, right? So it could be our town or village or city or whatever. In today's world, 2022 mentioned, communities can be virtual. In fact, communities are virtual. Yeah, they're virtual. So it'd be interesting to think about what that means in terms of the application of those messages we just spoke about in this chapter, what that means in the context of virtual communities and now a far more globalized world, which I think is a very important probably aspect to think about, because we do live in a much larger global village now.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Something that comes to mind is about this, we will hear about we're in places, luckily, where we get to benefit from technology and live quite comfortably, quite easily. And we hear about stories of a lot of people still living difficult lives, and it makes us feel blessed. But when we see that what things like the internet and technology has done to this part of the world, and how maybe other parts of the world people have been taken advantage of in order for us to benefit from all this. And I think it's these type of communities where it's become into like the trade of the world, and where resources have been taken and people have benefited elsewhere, and the people from where the resources were taken have ended up suffering, and they've done the work and labor, and they don't really benefit it, and they don't see the fruits of that labor. I think because we're witnesses to that, I think as humankind, we're responsible for making amends and helping people who now need the help, because we've had the help and we've benefited much from the work and the sweat off other people's backs.
It's amazing how it can be so much more encompassing than just something as simple as identifying somebody physically or some type of person. Again, because of the inner reflection as well as the external reflection, it's huge. There's so much to these 7 short little verses.
Yeah.
And I don't even think we tapped through all of it. I think we've just gotten to the surface of the obvious stuff. Here we're just trying to figure out a bona fide translation that matches in accordance with how it's presented in the book, and what the words should actually mean versus what they were changed to. That alone can be looked at under these verses. The concept that somebody was being deceptive on a global level, because these things are globally accessible to anybody who has technology at their fingertips, right? But if they don't understand what's going on here and they take it at face value, look at how much that has changed since we've gone through it alone. They can be easily misled. And it's just,
Yeah.
The chicken skin, the goosebumps.
Yeah, the goosebumps moment, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it's interesting, and just I suppose beginning to wrap it up, just through these 7 short verses in this one chapter, we've touched on so many concepts, and we could go on for many, many hours doing this, but we've touched on Deen, the definition of Deen, and the way some of it's been mistranslated in this chapter. We've spoken about bounties of God. We've spoken about Islam. So Islam is not even mentioned in this chapter, but it was absolutely imperative that we touched on Islam to understand the objectives and the principles behind
a better understanding of Deen.
Yeah, we touched on the meaning of yateem and miskeen, and we studied and understood what that means and why that's relevant to this chapter. We spoke about the definition of salat, right?
Musalleen, excuse me.
Yeah, musalleen, and we spoke about salaatihim, and we begun, because a lot of people have been asking us to do videos and podcasts describing the meaning of salat, and I've always said, look, okay, we will come to that, and it absolutely deserves a focused piece of study to do that. But what we have at least determined in today's podcast is that prayer is not the correct translation everywhere. Right? We've at least determined that today.
Yes.
And because it doesn't fit in the context, the meaning doesn't fit either. So we've done that
either.
Absolutely. So we've done that as well, and we spent a lot of time thinking about, okay, the word withhold, or yamna'oon, ma'oon, and Amada. It was very, you triggered something when you were talking about the Arabic word of mim ayn noon, because actually in Urdu as well, ma'ine means meaning, and purpose, which is, I think you're suggesting in Arabic linguistics. So that triggered a very interesting discussion in my own mind as well. So we really spoke about that, and we spoke about how all of this fits together, what the common thread is through all of this. And we spoke about the very important role that we all have in playing a part in the community. And we spoke about the objective of the part we're playing in the community and how that's an integral part of Deen, which, as we discussed, unfortunately is not often discussed when people are asked the question, well, what is Islam? What does it mean to you? That doesn't come through. And God is explaining that is Deen. This is one of the purposes of this chapter. He's explaining what Deen is, or a key part of it. So, I mean, that's been incredibly useful for me just to kind of hear your thoughts and for us to go through this together and think about, okay, what could these different words mean and how does it all come together? And those jigsaw puzzles, I think we found some there and we put them together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. So what I can round up there from all that I can share basically is my key takeaway there is it's about those who aren't serving purpose in order to live peacefully in communities. And I felt like that was showing us that because it's the descriptions there, it's saying to us that we need to be involved with the people around us. We can't just be segregated and in groups and say that, oh, within this community, because we are like this, we're not going to deal with the fringes, or we're not going to deal with a part of the community who might need help. No, it is our responsibility, and we should be seeking one ma'na, or if not one purpose, one meaning, there should be a collective purpose within communities. And if, for example, someone's on the fringes and they might cause problems for the peace, because if they're not a part of this purpose, people understand that having purpose in life is very important, and to feel that what you do has meaning to other people and not just yourself, I feel is very valuable to people in their life. So if they're on the fringes, and I mean, I'm just using this as one example from what the description is. If they're on the fringes and they're not being allowed into this purpose because of other people who are making a show and they want the attention, then they might then become, that some hatred is going to come up, or they're going to want to cause problems again to go against these people who are causing this. And that's why I said mischief before, because I think this kind of behavior can cause a spread of things, to cause like a knock-on effect of bad results.
Cascading negativity.
Exactly.
Yeah. Makes sense. I wonder if the translation of the heading of this chapter, Surah Al-Ma'oon, I know in many translations I've read, it's the small kindness. Perhaps, I don't think it's small kindness. I think perhaps the better one is the meaning or the purpose.
Yes.
I think that would be a better translation, not small kindness.
For the purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's pretty good.
Yeah.
The collective purpose.
The collective purpose.
Because I think it's talking about community purpose, or
yeah, very interesting. We've even retranslated the actual name of the chapter.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense. Small kindness just doesn't even grasp a little bit as to what this is about. It's like a misnomer. It's like the opposite of what this is intended. Yeah,
I don't think there's anything small about what these verses are describing. I think it's very big, what the idea is behind all this. So to finish on a small kindness, I think kind of, if we were to take that meaning, I think it would take away from the meaning of the verse. The word is meaning, and it's by changing that word, it takes away some of the meaning.
shall we wrap this up? Hopefully, others who see this and hear this podcast will find some value in this, because we've done something that's not very easy. We've repurposed, retranslated something.
Yeah. I wanted to add that maybe that if we get some feedback on this, that we might develop a better understanding of, what has transpired here. But I think as far as a first reading of it and unpicking through it, I think we've done very well, and it's painted a very much clearer picture as to what is being said.
A much more comprehensive understanding.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
So
absolutely.
thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that was thoroughly enjoyable. And Mike, thank you for selecting that one for us to unpick as well.
No worries. It was my pleasure. It stood out to me, and I thought it was very important that we should do what we did. Even if we're only hitting the surface of it, I think it really opens it up for people to study, and for themselves to go in there and look and see and challenge themselves, challenge their understanding to a more inclusive and more encompassing understanding.
Thank you very much. Thank you both. And inshallah, we will do this again.
Absolutely.
I look forward to it.
God willing, indeed.
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
Peace and blessings.
Take care.
Peace.
Bye.
أفلا يتدبرون القرآن